I'm doing good, and Noah? I'm doing good, and Noah?
From 2 hairline fractures on her spine to T11.
8 weeks. That's how much time was left on the clock when a dying woman walked, legally and deliberately, into a document that nobody was supposed to notice. No press release, no announcement, no headline, just a quiet filing, a transfer of property. A $2.9 million beach condominium in Florida, jointly owned with her husband, moved out of his name and into her personal trust alone. Her name only. 8 weeks later, she was gone. The woman was Joni Lamb, co-founder of Daystar television network, one of the largest Christian broadcasting empires on the planet, reaching over 2 billion homes worldwide. And the question that document left behind is the one this entire video is built around. Why does a woman who knows she is dying quietly remove her husband's name from a $3 million property? Stay with me, because nothing about this story is simple, and every single fact you're about to hear is documented. Act 1. Who is Doug Weiss? To understand what that legal document means, you first have to understand who Doug Weiss is, because he didn't enter Joni Lamb's life through a chance encounter. He entered it the way so many figures enter the world of Christian media, through a television screen, carrying the weight of credentials, speaking with the calm authority of someone who has seen the worst in people and helped them heal. Doug Weiss is a licensed psychologist based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He is the founder of Heart to Heart Counseling Center, an organization that markets multi-day intensive programs to couples dealing with sexual addiction, infidelity, and a concept Weiss himself branded as intimacy anorexia, the emotional and physical withdrawal one partner inflicts on another within a marriage.
Partner betrayal trauma is real trauma. You did not cause this trauma. Whether you've experienced sexual addiction, infidelity, intimacy, anorexia, or all of them, you have been through pain. Now you can heal, by going once a week somewhere, and if that's what you need to do, I understand that. But you can expedite that process. You can come to Colorado Springs and you can do kind of a boot camp intensive for partner betrayal trauma.
He has authored over 40 books. He has a professional counseling license granted in 2000 and a psychology license granted in 2008, both in Colorado. For years, he appeared on Daystar television as the expert, the healer, the man with the answers, sitting across from Joni and Marcus Lamb, talking about broken trust, about covenant, about how marriages survive the unsurvivable. That was the image. Now here is what the public record also shows. The Colorado State Board of Licensed Professional Counselor Examiners has issued 2 formal letters of admonition against Doug Weiss. The first, in November 2002, found that he had misrepresented his credentials by calling himself a licensed marriage and family therapist, a protected professional title, one he has never held. The second, in 2010, found that during a 3-day intensive session, rather than de-escalating conflict and focusing on healing the relationship, Weiss instead, and this is the board's own language, became an executioner of the marriage, rushing both parties into discussions about divorce, asset distribution, and writing goodbye letters to each other. He accepted and signed that order on November 23, 2010. These are not allegations. These are matters of public licensing record. Act 2. The timeline nobody talked about. Marcus Lamb died on November 30th, 2021. He had been one of the most prominent voices on Christian television opposing COVID-19 vaccination. His network had platformed numerous guests discouraging vaccines, and then Marcus Lamb was hospitalized with COVID-19 and died. The circumstances were widely reported by NBC News, NPR, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. Joni later wrote in her book Through the Storm that Marcus died of heart failure while hospitalized for COVID. The public record of what preceded that death stands documented across every major outlet that covered it. Now hold this date, January 27, 2022. That is 58 days after Marcus Lamb died. On that day, less than 2 months after the death of her husband, Doug Weiss filed for divorce from his wife of more than 30 years. The divorce was finalized in May 2022. Doug Weiss did not announce it publicly until February 8, 2023. That is an 8-month gap between the finalization of his divorce and telling anyone. 8 months during which he was still running heart-to-heart counseling, still taking in couples at their most broken and vulnerable, still presenting himself, in his books, on his website, in his marketing, as a man with a thriving marriage and the tools to save yours. 7 former female clients who later spoke to investigative journalist Julie Roys described feeling completely betrayed when the truth came out. These women, who spoke anonymously to protect their privacy, said they felt gaslit when they asked questions, blamed for their husband's infidelity, shamed for their emotional reactions. And in one case, a woman was assigned an exercise to write down 10 things she could have done differently to prevent her husband from acting on his addictions. She called it a slap in the face. The polygraph process at Heart to Heart raised further red flags. Independent polygraph experts confirmed to the Roys report that the tests administered there routinely exceeded 4 relevant questions, significantly reducing their statistical reliability. One woman's husband had 10 questions on his test. Nearly every husband passed on the first attempt at Heart to Heart. Many later failed polygraphs administered by different examiners elsewhere. The polygraph examiner at the affiliated company, Honest to Pete, which shares the same phone number as Heart to Heart, is Chase Cocking, Doug Weiss's own son-in-law. Heart to Heart never responded to the Roys report's inquiries. Act 3, the courtship, the jet, and the money. In August 2022, while his divorce still hadn't been publicly disclosed, Doug Weiss began dating Joni Lamb. She described their courtship in a Charisma Media interview. A trip to New York City, chaperoned, she said, a proposal in March 2023, a wedding on June 10, 2023. Now here is where the financial documentation becomes impossible to ignore. The Trinity Foundation, which has tracked religious organization finances for decades using public FAA flight data and property records, documented that, from October 2022 onward, Daystar's ministry jet, a 1997 Gulfstream GV, made 24 round-trip flights from Fort Worth to Colorado Springs and 13 round-trip flights from Fort Worth to Destin, Florida. Colorado Springs is where Doug Weiss lives and works. Using publicly available per-mile cost data and flight distance calculations, the Trinity Foundation estimated the cost of those 37 round trips at approximately $769,220. For context, commercial round-trip airfare between Fort Worth and Colorado Springs was available for under $500 per person with advance booking. Daystar is not required to disclose how it spends money. It claims church status and files no Form 990 with the IRS. There is no public financial accountability. The honeymoon charges, documented through expense reports obtained by the Roys report, showed approximately $96,000 in charges across 2 trips, both billed to a Daystar corporate credit card and annotated with the names of Joni Lamb and Doug Weiss at a resort in Los Cabos, Mexico. The itemized resort bill placed the actual honeymoon cost at $13,808. Joni publicly denied ministry funds paid for the honeymoon. Daystar said all personal charges were reimbursed by Joni personally. The Roys report requested documentation of those reimbursements repeatedly. None was provided. 3 months after the wedding, in September 2023, Joni Lamb and Doug Weiss jointly purchased a beachfront condominium near Miramar Beach, Florida. Purchase price, $2.9 million. Both names on the title. Act 4, the document, March 2026. Joni Lamb is fighting metastatic bone cancer. She has told almost no one. Daystar's public statements mention only a back injury. Doug Weiss tells viewers on Ministry Now that Joni has been dealing with 2 hairline fractures on her spine. The cancer, if confirmed, is not disclosed publicly until after her death. And in March 2026, Joni Lamb files a quitclaim deed. She removes Doug Weiss's name from the Florida condominium. She transfers sole ownership into her own personal revocable trust. Not a joint trust, not a family trust. Her name only. 8 weeks later, on May 7, 2026, Joni Lamb dies at her home in Bedford, Texas. Now, to be fair and responsible, there is a legitimate legal explanation for this kind of move. When someone knows they are approaching the end of their life, restructuring assets through a personal trust is a standard mechanism for ensuring property passes according to their specific wishes, bypassing the contested process of probate. That is a real reason, a lawful reason, and it should be stated plainly. But the question that sits alongside that explanation is this: whose specific wishes? And who was she protecting that property for, or from? Joni had 3 children. Her son, Jonathan Lamb, had been fired from Daystar in November 2024 after a 15-month review process following his and his wife Susie's efforts to surface a sexual abuse allegation involving their daughter and their refusal to publicly endorse Joni's marriage to Doug Weiss on air. Joni said the termination was for insubordination. Jonathan and Susie told a different story. When Joni Lamb died, Jonathan and Susie were not called to her bedside. Susie Lamb stated publicly that their family was not informed that Joni was dying until it was too late. Jonathan was not included in the official program at her memorial service at Gateway Church on May 18, 2026. Marcus Lamb had left a written directive naming Jonathan as the future president of Daystar after Joni. That document exists. Jonathan is currently outside the organization his parents built. Act 5, The Silence. When Joni Lamb died, Doug Weiss issued a statement. He wrote that he had lost his wife, and that there are no words that capture the weight of that sentence. It was measured. It was brief. It was appropriate in the way that grief statements are appropriate. There was no mention of the cancer timeline, no acknowledgement of when he knew, no comment on the quitclaim deed, no statement on Jonathan and Susie's accounts, no clarity on his future role at Daystar. Just silence. And here is what makes that silence remarkable. This is a man who built his entire professional identity on the belief that healing requires honesty, that transparency is not optional, that speaking the hard truth, even when it breaks something, is the only path through. He wrote 40 books on these themes. He charged couples thousands of dollars to sit across from him and be told exactly that. The man whose brand is honesty chose silence at the moment when the documented record raised the most questions. That is not a verdict, it is an observation. Let's state clearly what is documented. Joni Lamb built something extraordinary. She co-founded a network that reaches over 2 billion homes. She survived the public exposure of her first husband's infidelity. She led an organization through grief, through crisis, through a global pandemic. People who knew her personally describe a woman of deep faith, fierce loyalty, and genuine warmth. All of that is true, also true. In her final 8 weeks, she quietly removed her husband's name from a $3 million property. She was fighting a cancer almost no one knew about. Her son was locked out of the organization, of her bedside, and of her memorial program. The $40 million estate sits in a trust. The succession question at Daystar is unresolved. The 7 women who said heart-to-heart counseling traumatized them are still waiting for accountability. And the man who was removed from that Florida deed has issued no public explanation. We don't know what Joni Lamb meant by what she did. But she was not a woman who signed documents without understanding them. She ran a global broadcasting empire. She managed multi-state real estate holdings. She had survived enough to know exactly what a legal instrument does, and doesn't, protect. She signed that deed 8 weeks before the end, and the silence that followed her death is louder than anything anyone has said since. If this video helped you understand what the documented record actually says about this story, share it. Not because we're asking for the algorithm, but because the people who gave to this ministry, who prayed for this family, who trusted this institution, they deserve a clear account of what is publicly known. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think Joni Lamb meant by that quit-claim deed? Estate planning, or something else? This is a real conversation, and your perspective matters. If you're new here, subscribe. The next chapters of this story are coming. The estate, the succession, Marcus Lamb's written directive, and whether it carries any legal weight. You'll want to be here when the documentation arrives. Like this video if you believe accountability journalism in faith spaces matters. It's the simplest way to tell us this work is worth continuing. Joni Lamb, July 19, 1960, May 7, 2026. She built something that reached the world. The world is still asking what she meant by what she left behind.